what role do women play in the infantilization of men and dads in, the last couple of decades that is contributing to boys leaning into misogyny?
Exactly.
Welcome to the Reframe, where we have real, unfiltered conversations about mental health, parenting, and addiction treatment in a changing world. Hosted by Douglas Bowden, a therapeutic consultant with 35 years of experience, we explore the shifts shaping mental health care, featuring experts pioneering new approaches and offering practical advice. Join us as we challenge old narratives and reframe the way we think about the challenges in mental health treatment. This is The Reframe. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to The Reframe. Today's guest is Hilary Moses, who's a therapist, parent coach, and speaker with decades of experience supporting families and adolescents. She has worked as a wilderness clinician and a clinical director and has taught at Arizona State University. She's a leading voice in parenting, treatment transitions, and family healing. Hilary, welcome to The Reframe.
Thanks, Douglas. It's so nice to be here.
This sort of comes out of some conversations you and I have had over the years when we get to catch each other at these conferences and we get fired up on various topics. And this is one that I think we see as a pre-Father's Day episode. We're coming up on that, and there's a lot of, I think, resonance. For me, we were joking beforehand about the nature of greeting cards, Mother's Day cards versus Father's Day cards, and something to pay attention to when they go shopping this year. But why don't I toss it over to you and talk about just what's the underpinnings, what's sort of the cultural narrative about fathers and mothers, especially in the therapeutic and academic environments.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what you read about greeting cards too. When you said that, my brain went to the Mother's Day cards are probably really sweet. The Father's Day cards are funny and like fart jokes and swear jars and stuff like that.
Lots of beer and barbecues and incompetent.
Right. Same with when you're searching for gifts. And it's funny when we were talking before about how dads are represented in sitcoms. After that conversation we had, I did a search on sitcoms that highlight dumb dad figures, and the list is like The Simpsons, Home Improvement, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Shameless, Step by Step. I mean, each of them have this dumb dad figure who is in over his head. So I'll say that. I also want to say that there's two pieces that I'm thinking of leading into this. One, this stirred back up as a topic for me because of the lens I have on my family right now and my relationship. And my husband and I had a solid month of empty nesting. And then his dad passed away and his mom, who's got mild dementia, moved in with us. And pretty quickly we saw our stereotyped, polarized dynamics that we saw in ourselves as parents, saw that stir back up.
Right.
And for me, I witnessed myself falling into what I'm afraid of for dads. And that is as the female who, there's like an empathy side, there's also an organizational side, and I have these strengths of keeping it all together, and he's fun. And he has a lot more strengths than that, but I saw my own frustration and my own finger pointing and also devaluing him and what he brings to the table. And I was like, oh, this is the conversation I had with Doug about how dads get minimized, especially in the treatment world, especially when we're surrounded by female therapists, we're surrounded by female teachers, and a lot of the conversation is about how to be more empathetic and come alongside people and listen to emotions. And I think that's a framework. And one of the questions I'll just say really quickly is, what are we seeing that's different, that's bringing this to the table? And my concern is that I'm not seeing anything different. Right? Moms are still the primary parent and dads are devalued in the role of the family. And that's why it matters to me.
So that's the cultural piece. But practically speaking, just to level set, there's a growing, I'd say, over tilting I guess that sort of judges it. But we've gone, and you've got some statistics about this, of how many new therapists are female, how many of the teachers are female, how much of that world has that lens that brings into it, in addition to the cultural overlay, which I think can affect women in these practices, but they're bringing that lens to it too. What are some of the statistics around that?
There's higher percentages of female teachers, there's higher percentage of female therapists, and that moms are still the primary parent. And even when I do research on the framework of gentle parenting, which is kind of a parenting style du jour, and there's pros and cons, but it speaks to women. It's set up as a framework that is meant for moms. And so there's parts of it that are a helpful piece of the puzzle, but it doesn't take the whole thing into consideration. But I have the stats here, but it's saying that there's a problem.
It's like 85%, 90% of newer therapists especially are female.
Yeah, the therapists, elementary school teachers, K through 12 teachers, special ed teachers, women, 75% and higher.
And we can do a whole other episode on the effects on boys, but I think today we're talking about men. So, what do you think are some of the big differences that lens brings, and how does it affect therapy? You work in your coaching capacity with parents all the time. What are you seeing play out in the rooms when you're catching yourself saying, wait a minute, am I applying a different lens here? And how do we have to sort of value the dad role as being the fun guy, bringing maybe a more spontaneous or innovative or whatever the characteristics we want to bring into it? How do you shift from taking the negative lens on the father's role and see that it can be complementary to that of the mom?
I think it's important for us to say that we are going to be talking in broad strokes. There's some stereotypes. Sure. None of this is all or nothing, and I don't want to discount all of the everything. And I want to say that there's also to consider the Me Too movement, spotlight on patriarchy, spotlight on narcissism, toxic masculinity, which are important to have spotlighted and thoughtfully addressed. And I think the downside is the broad stroke that gets painted and masks the strengths that dads bring to the table. So part of what we're seeing in coaching, one, is that women are consistently still the ones showing up. I'll say so we have a dads group and in the marketing of it, our thinking is, well, we have to figure out how to market it to the moms because the dads aren't going to pay attention and the moms are going to be the one that are going to make their husbands go and do it. Right? So even in the language of how we're choosing to market, we're marketing toward mom. And I think that's part of the problem. Right? So we even talked about how do we really step aside from that. I mean, there's some truth to the numbers in marketing that Sure. At least in our world of parent coaching, struggling kids, all of that moms are doing the deep dive searches and all of that more. So that is happening. And how can we break our own language? And that's part of why I reached out to you to have this conversation as well. And I guess the other thing that I want to say briefly right now is that in the room, in the parent coaching that we're doing, moms are showing up more often. And part of what I'm hearing is from the language of the moms in these kind of traditional male-female parenting dynamics is that moms are talking about how, the dads are avoidant, or the mom's, creating all the rules, dealing with all of the mess, dealing with the school, dealing with this, and dad comes home and blows it all up. Like, he can have another hour of screen time. It's fine. Right. And so there are some of those stereotype conversations that are happening. And I think that the women who are showing up to do this work are part of what we're trying to help them with is to see the strengths that the dads bring so that they can value that and see it as complementary and they can see each other as complementary and stop being so antagonistic in the dynamic.
So you reach the parents through the moms and marketing to them, but then you have to also keep the dads interested and not feel attacked, or that their lens on the world or how they just their operating system is devalued. How do you do that? That sounds like a very delicate balancing act.
And it depends on who's showing up. There's all sorts of specifics about that.
Right.
I would say that part of it is really intentionally making sure that each voice has time. Typically, when two people are showing up, one person tends to be the talker and take over more often. Sometimes that's the mom. Sometimes that is the dad.
Sure.
And I think really intentionally carving out time. And then when I'm thinking of a recent call session that I had where the dad tends to actually see things more rigidly and more negatively, and the mom tends to have more empathy and be more in charge. And we're going for that middle place, right? Like, nobody is all right all the time. So, in classic Gottman style, somewhere in the middle is a more full truth. So let's take part of what you're saying, and see if we can find a middle path that values both of these, because we don't want, it's like the wise-minded work in DBT. So we talk about kind of developing a wise-minded parenting approach that balances both sides, and talks about how these parents are in the trenches. They're in a war zone. They're in the trenches together. Can they see each other as being alone in the trenches and see what value they each bring? Because we need both of them to come to the table.
Yeah, I keep coming back to in my as I'm thinking about this, sort of the sitcom narrative, and how dads feel marginalized. And what you're talking about, and having their voice have equal weight and approaching them. But I think even the language of therapy, first of all, I think it's infused into our cultural conversation more and more. I think especially among women and moms. How does that affect the therapist in their work? Partly we're doing this podcast to reach the therapist. How can they be more mindful of their lens and some of their own biases, and now some of the negative cultural overlay on dads pervasively? How can they be more aware of how they're coming at it and needing to find that balance when it might go against some of their own preconceived notions, their own internal viewpoint on who men and dads are?
Yeah. I think it's really starting where we claim to start, which is, what are each of your strengths, right? And really carving out time to understand, hear it from each of them as individuals, hear them talk about each other's strengths, so that we're starting from an understanding that there are characteristics, there are values, there are habits that each person brings that are strengths. And in the therapy language, if we're doing it really well, what I think kind of first about empathy and attunement and curiosity to help people. And this is, there's developmentally appropriate approaches depending on a kid's age and capability, but emotional attunement, which is classically something that moms do stereotypically. And then there's also, and there's a big lean on that, right? We gotta be curious. We gotta hear what their emotions are. We need to align with them, come alongside them, all of which is true. And then we also
keep them safe. There's a I think safety is a part of it too. There's that.
Ooh, yeah.
Well, maybe we should come back to that, but I think that's a thread here.
Yeah, safety, and it is a thread. And I think that what ends up happening with the emotional attunement is that moms also stereotypically relieve. They come in to relieve the pain. Right. Whereas, and this is where I think we need to be in our therapeutic language, bring both in, dads more classically help a kid push through.
Right.
Right? Like the whole conversation of like, man up, wipe it off, just give it a rub and keep going. And we need both of those, right? We need to develop emotional the EQ, right? And emotional language. And we also need, great, okay, that's how you're feeling. Now let's go make this happen.
Right.
We need both of those.
Well, for me, it's paralleling a lot of the conversations we have internally and on this podcast and other venues around how much young people in general are getting the therapy. And a lot of there's so much attention being paid to the mental health crisis and all this kind of stuff. And I have questions about whether it's actually a crisis or manufactured. That's another episode. But versus the experiential, the doing, the having challenges. I mean, you worked in wilderness for years. It's about discomfort and how do you find ways to adapt and push through and start to have confidence in yourself. And that seems like a parallel distinction, and how dads, again, stereotypically, will often push through, the suck it up part versus the softening, making it better. And I think there's some parallels to how we work with teens and young adults and how we approach those things.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the concepts that is coming into my brain is the rough and tumble play, which is one of the really important pieces in early childhood. Also, one of the stats that I read was about a father's depression affecting a child's mental health 3 years, like pretty consistently 3 years down the line, that there was a correlation between a father's depression and a kid's stability later on, which I think is different than kind of the parent coaching model and how we're showing up for dads. However, it's obviously related, because I think that there's the avoidance piece that we talk about when we see dads consistently feeling not good enough at home, because we are coaching and therapizing toward a female framework and female language when we're talking about how to show up as better parents for our kids. And let's say, dads are at work, they feel competent, they feel confident, they're, depended on in certain ways, and they come home and they're not listening well enough. They're not gathering information. They're not helping in this way. They need to do this differently. They have to go tell their kid that they have to go put the consequence into action that happened earlier today when the dad wasn't even there, because the dad has to come in and be the heavy, and he didn't do that right either. And there's a lot of message delivering that you are not good enough. And so then we see the dads not coming home and avoiding and focusing on work, which they get crapped on for also, right? You're a workaholic. That's all you do. You never come home. Like, well, it feels terrible when I come home. And so those cycles all lead to increased depression in dads. And we need our dads to feel awesome, because we need the kids to have their dads feeling awesome.
Well, what's going on there? We were talking about this, prepping for this episode, and I think you were being self-referential when you were talking about your husband coming home, and in this case, taking care of your mother-in-law. But and I call it air traffic control. Where you've got so many things that you're balancing and juggling, and this is one of your strengths. And I think it's more true, again, stereotypically, of moms, and they're having to hold on to the kids' education and when the therapy sessions are, and any number of other things around the household. And then that dad is, at work and maybe working too much, and maybe that's partly avoidance. But then what are some of the practical effects of that when he comes home, when he gets there? And I think you started to talk about this, that he's going to feel that sense of incompetence and to use the vernacular, otherness when he's coming home. How does that play out practically?
In the moment, we see the dynamic play out in the tension between the parents. I think the tone for both parents shifts, and the kids start to witness it as soon as there's this transition. Parents coming and going from the house is a big transition for them as parents and for the kids. There's you add a person to the mix, and everything changes, right? It's systems theory, and so we see the tone change in the house. Sometimes it's immediate increased tension because of everybody's anticipatory anxiety of what happens when this transition is occurring. And so I think practically we see a change in the whole tone of the house. Maybe the mom increases tension, feels more stressed, and I think it's because it's this, the language that just came up for me is that dads are seen as another thing to be managed, not as a value add, right? The feeling for the mom, the anticipation for the mom and the dad coming home is, okay, one more thing to manage. He's going to have screwed this up. He's going to do this. I know this is going to happen. And so even before that transition of somebody coming back into the house at the end of the day or coming out of their home office, more likely these days, the tension increases, and that actually leaks out in the communication to the kids. And I think that the polarization of the parenting we see happen as well, where the dad knows that he's going to come home and be managed and almost acts out as a result and causes more chaos, right? Immediately comes in to be playful. You think I'm going to screw it all up anyway, so I might as well have fun and hang out with my kids. And so the polarization makes each role escalate.
You've even used the word infantilization.
Oh, yeah. Right, because they feel managed, which is infantilizing.
Boy, that's a tough one to break out of.
Yeah. And then what happens, I think the mom, so in my coaching role, when I'm then focusing on one more thing that the mom needs to do, right? How do you show up in a way that expresses, that understands, believes, and expresses true value in what your co-parent brings to the table? And the moms are like, wait, I have to do more work? No. He needs to show up as less of the clown. He needs to know what he's coming into. He needs to help me manage the schedule. He needs to make sure the kids are doing their homework before he's playing video games with them. He needs to do the work. And it really quickly shifts into placing blame. And we focus a lot on ownership and claiming. And for the moms, it feels exhausting. And so then we're in this battle to get the moms to keep showing up in a way that supports valuing the dads.
So we're moving from infantilization and move the dads into middle management.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Boy, it's tough. And I think about it. Obviously, it's hard not to personalize it at some level. You have 2 sons. I have 3 daughters. And I think about how bringing that, you can't help but bring that sort of that fun, playful. I think about it too because we watched more Family Guy than we should have, and I came to realize. Hannah said to me recently, because she's started to watch it as an adult now, and she's like, "Oh my God, Dad, you let me watch that, but I didn't get any of the jokes." Like, no, you didn't, but it was sure fun, and I think we got into trouble for having watched that. But I've also come to almost I can't watch Family Guy really anymore because Peter Griffin is such a complete doofus. He's doing everything wrong.
I'm embarrassed to say I've actually never seen it. Maybe I'm not embarrassed to say that, but anyway.
Well, there's too much of that here. And then a lot of South Park. I think that it's hard. I know that it was hard for me sometimes to almost see myself in the Peter Griffin, and as a dad. I think not just do we get that for the moms and for the kids, but I think, again, I guess this is personal, but I think it's hard not to also see yourself reflected that way, and I think it can take a hit, and you can find yourself falling into that pattern, or it normalizes it or justifies it somehow. And I think that's a hard part too. And I going back to, you have sons, I have daughters. I'm conscious of the fact that I was deliberate about having given them more rough and tumble than treating them as, princesses all the time, and trying to give them those, in a safe way, but to have the adventure and to push them outside of their comfort zone and to really value their being challenged in the physical domains and the ways that moms tend not to. But it was something that I was aware of in the culture, that girls can be pigeonholed and we put that on them, but that having those experiences, and it's also, I think, largely because of what I've been doing for a living for 33 years and sort of see how that plays out. But nonetheless, I think it's something that we as dads also have to be mindful of and value our role in a healthy, constructive role, in a healthy and constructive manner, that we attend to. How do we take those things that are our strengths, feel good about those things, and not feel put upon with the toxic masculinity, but to emphasize that, be deliberate about it and intentional, but to make sure that we're embracing our role as dads and what we can bring to the parenting as distinct from what moms tend to do.
Yeah, and advocating, right? We talk about advocating and asserting in healthy ways with each other as parents, so that dads aren't just getting beat up by the women, metaphorically, hopefully, not literally, and then hiding away. There's the stereotype of the dad, like my dad had his den, right? And it was full of books and encyclopedias, and, he would just go and sit in there, but like hide away in the den, and be able to say, hey, I have some value here. How can I help? Can we talk about this? And it's interesting, coming back to my personal experience and my own work to disentangle from, feeling like the bad guy. I think this is a dynamic we talk about a lot, where there's a good guy and a bad guy, and the fun dad, the Disneyland dad, is the good guy, and the mom who's kind of holding all these things is the bad guy. And in my work in reinvigorating strengths-based parenting into my awareness, part of my disentanglement was, or my reframe was, that I'm a superhero. Right? I'm a superhero for my family when I am holding everyone accountable, checking the homework, making sure they're doing this before they're on screens or doing something else. There is a superhero role in that. And if I'm showing up feeling like the bad guy, then I've got that tone. I've got an ick tone toward my kids, toward my partner. And that's I would say, more toxic than playing video games before doing the homework, right? And then, so seeing my strengths as a superpower, and then inviting myself to say, okay, well, what are his superpowers? And there are things like, he's so great at spontaneity and playfulness. I mean, for a long time, we both did the school trips, or we would take turns, but he could take the school trips with way less stress than I could. And he was way more fun. He could do things spontaneously. He could, show up to help with the unexpected in great ways and positive ways. And I think I said this to you before, I need more time. I'm not great spontaneously. I need a plan. If the plan doesn't go the way I want it to, I need time to recalibrate. And sometimes that means I need to go away. I need to pout. I need to blame somebody and get frustrated. And then I need to kind of get my head out of my butt for a period so that I can then show up. And when you're raising kids, there's so much spontaneity, hopefully, that you want to be a positive thing. And for me, I would get pouty about it, and he would just be joyful. And so that was a huge strength that he would bring to the family. And being able to see that as a strength and not just like, me, right? That's important.
I wasn't there, but I believe it.
Indeed.
It also occurs to me that dads have to do this not just as the parent partner, but also as the role modeling. How do you be masculine in a positive way? And I'm thinking, I started to in prepping for this podcast, and it's just a general interest of mine. And I watched the part that I could tolerate of that Netflix documentary about the manosphere. And if you look at the messaging that boys are getting absent other strong, appropriate male models, they're dipping into some pretty toxic, actual toxic stuff.
Yeah.
misogynistic stuff.
Yeah.
The young women are going towards a lot more misandry, but that's a different conversation. But nevertheless, the dads have to take on a positive role model presence, at the very least, to counteract what their sons are getting in the manosphere and online and gaming and all this kind of stuff, which is largely not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah,
They
I
have to kind
agree.
of own that, and I think the moms have to let the dads be in that role, or help support the dads being in that role to buffer what the boys are getting.
Yeah. Big time. Yeah, it's hard to read about some of the 18 and early 20-year-old men who are being fed by a misogynistic movement. And I think, the pendulum swings, and it's hard to consider that. And this is one of those places where I don't want to discount or minimize. There's so many experiences that are out there, and there's so many people who are marginalized in so many ways. And what role do women play in the infantilization of men and dads in, the last couple of decades that is contributing to boys leaning into misogyny?
Exactly.
It's sad, and it's scary to think about. And similarly, I've got two boys, and they've talked before, and they're 22, and my younger one's about to be 20 on Monday. They've talked before about the fears of even flirting with girls and women, and having such a hard time knowing how to show up in that world. I mean, so much of their time is figuring out how to show up online in that world. And I've got one kid who's more in that, and one kid who's not in that at all, and doesn't want to touch it really. And then we've got dads who have not, for the most part, they didn't grow up in a world where you weren't allowed to flirt, right? So they're not quite sure how to show up and model. I mean, they are, right? They know how to teach respect for women largely, and they know how to teach flirting without crossing a line for the most part. And there's so much fear for boys right now in learning how to be a balanced man. And I think it's hard for dads to know how to model for them.
I'm thinking about my own daughters, and having said to one of them at one point when she was getting to that age, and I made a comment to her about, men are dogs. Uh-huh. And they're after only one thing, and be careful, and blah, 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 dad stuff. Yeah. Well, there I go. I'm,
Right?
and I'm part of the problem.
We all are.
I gave it some more thought. I think she said to me something like, well, that's just not true. And I was thinking about it, and I thought more about it, and I really came back to think, that's really unfair of me. To the boys, right? And to the girls, because boys for the most part are nice. And if they flirt poorly, it's not for the most part out of ill intent.
Yeah, crossing lines.
And they shouldn't be pigeonholed the way I did. And it really sort of, and this is before the whole manosphere, before even the internet was a huge thing, I think, or at least the online stuff and all the Me Too and all that. But just sort of a dad to daughter kind of reflexive statement. And mostly I thought it was unfair to the boys. Yeah. Because boys aren't like that, and it's unfair to my daughters. Like, they have girls. It's unfair to my daughters because they have a lot more to offer. Yeah. Right, they have a lot more to offer than just their sexuality or bodies or whatever. So it was unfair to. Yeah, I mean, I screwed up all over the place with that one, but I think it's sort of somewhat. How easy it is to fall into these stereotypes and these black and white kinds of statements, especially when the culture supports that narrative.
Yeah, yeah. And I know we're talking about parenting, but, thinking about being a teenage, a teenager in general. And, my experience was of being a teenage girl. And then I got to raise teenage boys. And man, I'll tell you, I think teenage girls are tougher than teenage boys are.
Have you noticed the hairline? I have 3 dogs.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got better hair than I do.
Yeah, man. And okay, so I want to think some about how do we support a change, right? I want to make sure that teachers, right, for boys who become men, who have female teachers their whole lives. I guess I want it to be understood that this is happening, and I want us to really invite consideration in our language and how we're focusing. In family systems work and in parent coaching, we use the drama triangle a lot and the empowerment dynamic, where we're identifying the victim, the rescuer, and the persecutor to help people identify what roles they tend to be in. What does it sound like? What is their intention? What are the effects on each other? And I think that is, at least in the world of therapy, it's such common language that it can be a really nice place to start with strengths and understanding how the dad's strengths can be a hugely important role in the family dynamic, so that we can really pick them up and value them. And, in that language where the empowerment dynamic takes the persecutor role, which historically is that, like, do as I say, and, my way or the highway, and the rule follower, all of that person, which oftentimes stereotypically is the dad role, if we really focus on the strengths of that role, which is in that so there's boundaries and rigidity in that, but there's also a pushing through, right? So that's where we come, like, we want you to push through the emotions and deal with it and do what I tell you, right? So there's a not so great bent on that, but then there's a really positive way, and you go from the persecutor to the challenger in the empowerment dynamic language, where the challenger is there to say, yeah, you've got feelings and they matter, and you have to get this done by Tuesday. And you've got it, right? And it's the attitude of, you've got this, you can do this, you can have feelings and get the dishes done. Both are true. You've got it. I'm going to set a deadline for you, and if you can't get it done, then you know what, kiddo, you're not going to have your phone until it is done. And that's a challenger. It says you're capable, you have feelings, I hear them, I value them, and I still believe that you can do this. And to me, in the stereotype role of the rough and tumble dad, or the rigid line drawer who's not taking emotions and other things into account, I think that's a really great place to start with strengths. And then there's also the dad who's the rescuer, because we work with dads who are persecutors and dads who are rescuers, right? They're usually at one end of the spectrum or the other. Same with moms, but we're talking about dads. And the rescuer who's like the sucker, and the daughter, this is probably you, Doug, right? Your daughter's got you wrapped around their fingers, right? And,
oh no.
Not you.
Not at all.
And so looking at the rescuer who wants there to be levity and wants to relieve, and they get to be the coach, right? Which I think is great language for the empowerment dynamic, because I would say more dads are coaches to their kids' teams than moms are, although I haven't looked at those stats lately. Moms are probably more coaches now than ever. I was a coach. But when you can go from the rescuer to the coach, and the coach's job is to get everybody to work well together. And so rather than the rescuer who comes in and says, like, no, you can have another hour of screen time, don't worry, right, whatever it is. When let's say the mom in this case has said, no, your screen time is done, period, end. The coach's job is to come in and say, hey, you guys got this. You can figure out how to work this out. I support both of you, and you can do it. And, whatever it is. There's so many different examples that are more clear than the way I just said it. But to use the empowerment dynamic language to highlight strengths.
And yes, and I say this with all due respect, but Hilary, can you make me a sandwich?
Oh, yeah. My sandwich spectrum.
Yeah, hope everyone gets that. That's a joke.
I can absolutely make you a sandwich, Doug. If you will go get the ingredients out and the plates, and if you will clean up after I make sandwiches.
Yeah, so there's... But tie that in with the coaching role and the complementary work and work. Don't just leave me hanging out there having asked you to make me a sandwich.
Yeah, for sure. So the sandwich spectrum is something that I made up, and it's super clinically valid, I'm sure. And I do write about it. I did put it in the book that we published a couple years ago. But the sandwich spectrum, to me, it's a nice concrete way to look at the polarized roles that we play and how, as long as everybody's doing something in between and a little bit of everything, then we're okay. So sandwich spectrum is on one end of it. Let's say you've got the stereotypical, well, we'll go with mom, stereotypical mom, always making a sandwich for the kid, stereotypical dad, never making a sandwich for the kid. And what we want is a little bit of everything, right? We want, sometimes I'll make you a sandwich and I'm going to ask you to make me a sandwich. And sometimes I'll get out the ingredients, you can make the sandwich, I'll clean up. And sometimes, we'll make sandwiches for everybody together. And the idea is to pay attention to the polarized roles that you're in on the sandwich spectrum. And for each parent to do something somewhere in between the two ends. And that's the sweet spot. That's what we want, all parents aiming for.
Yeah, that's a very helpful metaphor. What would you say? I don't know if you want to dip into your thoughts on gentle parenting, which is I know it's a hot topic, and we can talk a little bit about that and where that plays out, because that's sort of the moment.
Yeah,
I think a lightning rod, but also for those of us who are paying a lot of attention to the world of parenting, but for those who are the consumers of parenting advice and books and TED Talks or whatever, that's sort of in vogue.
Yeah, and I think it's set up as kind of a universal, this is the way to do it, and I think it discounts the role of the dad to some degree. It's and I said earlier, right, it's kind of built around a more feminine framework where the focus in part, and I'm not going to speak to it in depth, but I do want to talk about it a little bit, is that it's emotional attunement, it's bringing comfort, it's verbal processing, and classically those are skills, men, that are more typically women's and mom's skills, right? And I think there's benefits to it when done fully and consistently, right? So the framework encourages emotional language and attunement and empathy and natural consequences and all sorts of things that we teach as effective. And unless it's done, so I guess part of what I would say is, let me touch on natural consequences. So part of the gentle parenting framework focuses on individuality. It focuses on helping kids to use different language to address emotions, and it's talking about teaching them, better ways to deal with hard things. And a lot of parents stop at empathy, choice, and individuality. Right, those are and it's the women, it's classically the moms, who are putting this into action, and they like the empathy, like I want to talk about your emotions and how you feel, and I want to talk about choice, like what do you think, what do you think you should do here, and individuality, like let's support them having their own opinions, and unless you're really educated about developmental appropriateness and the developmental capability of your child, you might be asking too much at too young of an age. But then there's also these pieces about natural consequences, which we hugely support. However, we see parents who aren't resilient enough to tolerate the natural consequences part of gentle parenting. And if you don't have that puzzle piece in this, then this is where we shift into permissive parenting. And it often, I think, gets misinterpreted as permissive parenting because it's not being done consistently, it's not being done in full, and it's a framework that is also exhausting to parents. So we're seeing the moms who are trying to put this framework into action, they're exhausted. So they're not consistent and they're not doing the natural consequences part because they're not resilient enough for it. And so it kind of falls apart.
That's a key piece, that intolerance for the natural and logical consequences. And it's often about the parents' inability to tolerate their discomfort about their child's discomfort and the misunderstanding of developmental positioning and all of that. So, and I think it's also related to the over-therapization of language pervasively in our culture, that everything is taken through that lens and less of the instinctual, bringing the actual parental instincts and having to use a technique or a technology which serves to just give comfort to the parent but doesn't account for the child's actual developmental stage and the child's development of better decision-making and resilience. And we see a lot of this in our role as consultants and in our mentoring program, where that gentleness, that therapy speak just ends up in poor boundaries and lowered expectations, and we're seeing the wreckage of it on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I think that you would probably agree that we're seeing distress tolerance at an all-time low in kids who are growing up. Yeah, and there's so many reasons for that, and I could get on a huge technology screen time soapbox about that. And I think even coming back to gentle parenting, I think when it becomes permissive parenting and when the natural consequences aren't a part of it and when it's not done well and consistently, it negatively affects distress tolerance. And my belief is, and I would say that my experience is, that when we bring some of the strengths of the dad into it and that you might see more allowance for natural consequences. And when we come back to that idea of dads, helping to push kids through, that's where we have increased distress tolerance.
Yeah. What are some action items for our industry, for therapeutic programs, for individual therapists working with parents, and especially for fathers? What are some takeaways, some things they can do or attend to fairly concretely and immediately to help improve our delivery of some of these services?
One of the pieces in the outline, and I think Jenna, this was Jenna's language after our first conversation, is are we dismissing fun as non-essential? And part of what I think is interesting about this is the importance of not dismissing fun, right? That and valuing it as a strength. And so there's gentle parenting and over coddling, that's a thing. And then there's also raising achievement bots, where we're pushing kids to do a lot, right? Like have extracurriculars. There's all sorts of stuff. There's homework at way too early an age. There's a whole lot going on there, and making sure that the dad energy of fun is brought in intentionally and as a value and part of the week's schedule, right? So in my stereotypical, mother role, and I want to say I'm a step parent, and my kids have an awesome mom also, and have been the stepmom for 18 years. But I am the scheduler, right? And the to-dos. I am on top of all of the to-dos that need to happen. And making sure that fun is in there as part of the to-do is key. It's key. We need to make sure we're valuing fun. That. It doesn't have to be scheduled, but it has to be considered as an important part of the week to allow for. I think it comes like dad comes home, and even if it's homework time and everybody's working on homework and that's what's on the schedule, moms need to know that it is okay to push the pause button and let dad come in and wreak havoc for a little bit in that stereotype dynamic, and allow for that, be resilient enough as a family to then reset, to allow for the play and the reconnection with dad in their lives as an important figure. And then maybe in working with the dad, we can talk to the dad about, can you then wrap that up? And before you leave the room, can you say, okay, what are you supposed to be focusing on? How can I help? What do you need to get done before dinner time, or whatever it is, so that they can play that balanced role also, so that it's not the mom coming in and saying, okay, and managing and infantilizing the dad, like, okay, kids, like, go to your room, dad, and you guys need to be doing homework.
One of the things we've talked about is how if the gender roles were reversed, if instead of men coming home to a list of honeydews, that we were giving lists and commands to the moms. Speak to that for a moment.
And in a therapy session, if our frameworks in therapy and parenting were more in a male framework, a dad framework, and our conversations were about how, hey mom, you gotta be more like dad, you gotta use his language, you gotta, do it this way, do it that way, the conversation would be like, well, that's really narcissistic and misogynistic, so absolutely not, right? And there would be this very clear, especially in the way that we are culturally right now, we wouldn't have it.
There's not a whole lot of room for things to be reversed.
Well said.
What have we haven't touched on today that you'd like to?
Oh, gosh. I don't even want to look at the list that we came up with, because there's so many things. I think for therapists, I want to give a shout out to get back to strengths-based if you haven't delved into it for a while, because you're in your own rhythms of whatever models you're working on. Really get into strengths-based stuff again, whether it's positive psychology, strengths-based parenting, and just shine the flashlight on yourself a little bit to look at what your own beliefs are about men, about dads, about their role. When you're working with both parents, what's the storyline that you're hearing, and how can you show up in a way that is stewarding a strengths-based approach so that dads are valued, and so that you're not just talking about parenting in a way that the dad needs to be different, the dad needs to be better, the dad needs to have more emotionally attuned language, and train moms to value their partners, which is what we've been talking about the whole time, but just wanted to reiterate it, I guess.
Well, that's an excellent reminder, and I think that's a great place to wrap up. Remind everyone, happy Father's Day. Go find write your own Father's Day card that speaks to the values, not just the beers and barbecue or the incompetence. And I hope this has been a helpful episode for everyone. Hilary Moses, it's been great to have you on The Reframe.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Reframe. Follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. Please share this episode with your friends, colleagues, innovators in the industry, and anyone you feel would benefit from listening. To learn more about the Bowden Group and Bowden Mentoring and find additional resources, connect with us at www.thebowdengroup.com.